Welcome into the Fantasy Football Diagnostics Podcast, where we provide you with your weekly diagnosis of everything fantasy football. Whether it's season-long leagues, dynasty, DFS, or sometimes even IDP, we got you covered all year long. What's good? You know the vibes. Jon Jeune here, back with another live episode of the Fantasy Football Diagnostics Podcast. It is Wednesday, December 24th, Christmas Eve. Merry Christmas, happy holidays to all of you out there who celebrate. Appreciate y'all for tuning in on this lovely Christmas Eve, whether you are watching live on YouTube, X, or Twitch, or you're listening along on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, whatever your medium of content consumption. Very much greatly appreciated. It is week 17, championship week. This is what the entire season has been building towards. No more future planning, no more stashing, all about winning right now. Today I'm breaking down every matchup on the week 17 slate, giving you guys insight into players that I feel like are either underranked or overranked, right? So looking at those players that are inside the top 20 running backs and wide receivers, top 10 quarterbacks and tight ends, and telling you whether they deserve a shot in your lineup, whether they're outside of those thresholds or maybe they might be inside of those thresholds. And we're talking about guys that you should maybe be avoiding or expecting a down game from this week. So, as always, I'll give you guys my starts of the week, although this week is a little bit more weight to it. It's a championship starts of the week this week. So before we get tuned in, just from a quick reminder, if you want my final rankings, rather, if you want the FFDX cheat sheet, go check that out on patreon.com/FFDX. If you want my final expanded rankings, access to the Sunday morning Q&A for any last minute pivots, or the weekly waiver wire article, which probably a little bit late for you guys right now, but all that stuff is over there at patreon.com/FFDX. You got to become a supporter member for just $1 a month to unlock, those additional perks. But that FFDX cheat sheet is and will always be free on the Patreon. So all you got to do is join as a member. Now, as I mentioned on the waiver show on Tuesday, this will be our last show of the year. All right, we're not going to do a week 18. In terms of, are there going to be, is the cheat sheet going to be available? Will the rankings be available? Yes. All of that will still be available over at the Patreon page for week 18, but obviously that's for patrons only. However, there will not be a week 18 matchup show, as I'm choosing to spend time with family and prioritize that this year. So, week 18, hopefully a lot of y'all aren't playing that, week 18 playoff anymore, or maybe, I know the 2-week playoff is still a thing depending on what format you guys playing, but, we'll definitely do the best I can to help you guys any which way I can. So let's recap what happened last week. Last week we gave out 15 recommendations. We had 8 misses in total, 5 of the big variety. We had 7 hits in total. The 7 hits were actually some pretty substantial hits, but we'll go through it here. At quarterback, CJ Stroud did not come through for us. As I mentioned on the waiver show, that one hurt me too, personally. But Amir Abdullah thought that he could have brought some value in a PPR league. That was real deep PPR leagues, but lost the fumble, didn't really get much work after that. So ended up with negative points, which is a bummer for sure. At tight end, Colston Loveland, Dalton Kincaid, Mark Andrews, they all flopped. Aaron Jones, he was in and out of the lineup with injury. Ended up finishing as the running back 28. Tony Pollard, I thought he had a fine day, scored double-digit PPR points. I think everything that we talked about from his matchup was there. The volume, the game script, right? Everything that we talked about was there. He just didn't find the end zone. If he finds the end zone, he has a much better day. But he was ranked RB 28, finishes the RB 29. Still love the process there. And then Darren Waller, he flopped as well at the tight end position. But the hits, man, the hits were hitting. Trevor Lawrence, ranked as a QB 17, finishes the QB 1. Ja'Cory Krosky Merritt, we kind of got lucky there. I'm not gonna lie. Finishes the RB 36 after being ranked 47. Got in the end zone, so that made him, an RB 3, which is what we called him out to be. Kenneth Gainwell finishes the RB 7, had himself a big week, and then, on the hits, Bryce Young finishes the quarterback 13, 17.6 fantasy points. Tyler Shuck finishes the quarterback 15, 17.1 fantasy points, and Kirk Cousins finishes the quarterback 14 with 17.6 fantasy points there. And then Dak Prescott, we call that a hit, but that one, I think, the quarterback 11 after being ranked the quarterback 6, 19.2 fantasy points. That's a very good day. So while he didn't finish as the quarterback 6 like he was projected or ranked, by expert consensus, he still had a solid day. But if you started a Bryce Young, a Tyler Shuck, or a Kirk Cousins, none of these guys were far off from Dak Prescott, about 2 points total from where he was. So hopefully you didn't lose your matchup by 2 points making that move there. All right, let's get into the week. Let's talk about the matchups. From a weather perspective, it's an okay week. I mean, we've got, obviously, as you get into this part of the year, some of these, some of these games, in the East Coast or the Midwest, or so on and so forth, those games are, will have some weather concerns. The biggest one right now looks like Pittsburgh and Cleveland, as well as Philadelphia and Buffalo. Those two seem to be the biggest. In the Philadelphia or Pittsburgh Cleveland game, you've got rain, you've got wind. Wind can get up to 20 miles per hour. So, that game probably will, the passing games will probably take a hit there, as well as will the kicking game. And then in Philadelphia, Buffalo, you've got some chance from heavy rain. Winds can get up to 20, 25 miles per hour. It's going to be something to watch as we get closer to that game as well. Outside of that, it just looks like pretty much heavy rain throughout the rest of the games, right? So starting with, let's get in the first game here. And remember, these games start on Christmas Day, right? We've got 3 games on Christmas Day. We've got 2 games on Saturday. And then, the rest of the the Sunday games and Sunday Night Football and Monday Night Football. But the first of our Thursday night games, we've got the Washington Commanders taking on the Dallas Cowboys. And we've got Washington running back Chris Rodriguez. He is the expert consensus running back 32 this week. He returned in week 16 to lead the backfield in touches, had double-digit PPR points last week with 15 carries, 63 yards, and a touchdown. And then Dallas allows the 7th most PPR points to the position over their last 3 games. So if you're looking for an RB3 flex option, Chris Rodriguez makes a ton of sense here, given the matchup, given the role that he's seen. Josh Johnson is expected to make the start here in this game for the Commanders. So I think the question people are probably going to ask is, what do you do with Terry McLaurin and the rest of the Washington Commanders passing offense, right? I'm willing to play Terry McLaurin. I think the matchup here is just too good with how poor Dallas has been against opposing wide receivers. But I will stay away from Deebo Samuel, just given, recent usage, given the usage in recent weeks and whatnot, despite Dallas being the 4th best matchup for opposing wide receivers over their last 3 games here. If you are in Superflex, maybe you are suffering some injuries. Josh Johnson makes some sense there as well, just given the matchup here. And we've seen him have, good games throughout his career. He's a vet, so he's going to come off, obviously, getting thrown into a game is a whole lot different than, getting first team reps and preparing as if you're the guy and being the guy. And then obviously you got this matchup here. So definitely a solid spot. But on the Dallas side, you're going to start Dak Prescott. You're going to start those weapons and CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens. Even Jake Ferguson has a solid matchup this week. So Washington allows the 8th most PPR points to the position over their last 3 games. So it's a solid spot here for him as well, despite, recent poor performances. And again, if you are watching live, you want to jump in the chat, you've got questions, feel free to throw them in there. I see we've got a few in here as well. Darren Fenton says, yo, man, love the content. Appreciate that. I'm in the fantasy final. Brock Bowers is injured. Who would you like to start? Parkinson or Ingram? Or is there another play you would pick up? Between those 2 options, I like Parkinson actually quite a bit. The LA Rams get Atlanta, and Atlanta looks like a middling matchup for opposing tight ends. However, Parkinson has had a role. I think last week was kind of just like the ha gotcha moment where we all expecting Parkinson to have a big game, and he's been doing so well for so long, and then all of a sudden we all throw him collectively. We're like, oh, we got to throw him in our lineups now, and it makes sense because Devontae Adams is out, and then Terrence Ferguson goes and catches a touchdown. Right. So I like Parkinson still. I don't think much changed from last week when we thought he was a good play versus this week when he suddenly, is not on the radar as much anymore. Outside of that, if you want to really take your shot on somebody, I know, there's a couple tight ends we'll talk about in, this show here, but one of the guys that really sticks out is Taysom Hill. I think he makes a ton of sense. We're going to talk about him in a little bit, but, with his role, I think he provides a nice, steady floor at the position. Ray Gamer 7046 comes in saying Jefferson, Quentin Johnston, or Brian Thomas in a non-PPR. And now I'm assuming he's talking about Justin Jefferson, right? And so it's tough to say, man, because I really like Justin Jefferson quite a bit. Obviously they've got the quarterback situation. Detroit allows the 3rd most PPR points to opposing wide receivers over the last 3 games. If you're not going to go Jefferson, I would go Brian Thomas. I'm not going to go Quentin Johnston. He said, I've had Texans. Okay. So yeah, I'm not going to go Quentin Johnston against Houston, but I do like either Jefferson or Thomas in the non-PPR. I will lean Brian Thomas just because of the quarterback situation. Final answer. All right. And then Ray Gamer's coming in again saying, I've had Texans defense and Seattle and Seahawks defense roster since week 8, but I just added the Patriots defense. Would you start the Patriots defense versus the Jets, or the Lions versus the Vikings, or Lions defense versus Vikings defense over them? All right. Texans and Seattle. Seattle's playing Carolina. Texans are playing the LA Chargers. Those are both solid matchups that I wouldn't necessarily shy away from, although Seattle's defense has been very good anytime they don't play the Rams. So, it's hard for me, having had them all year, to say, yeah, I'm going to bench Seattle for another defense because, when they're not playing the Rams. But all that being said, when I statted everything out, the Patriots came out as my top defense on the week by a Denver came out as the top after I redid some things. Initially, New England was the top, but Denver came out as the top, and now New England is second. So, I would probably start New England over over those other options, just because 14.5 point favorites against the Jets, or 12.5 point favorites against the Jets. And Brady Cook, it's just I feel like it's too good of an opportunity here. All right, one more question, and then we'll continue on with the show. And then, obviously, if anyone has more questions, feel free to chime in. Ray Gamer 7046 with another question: if Kittle is out, would you play Fannin Jr. or Strange in standard, 6 points per touchdown, same format with wide receiver question? It's got to be Fannin Jr. for me. Strange obviously had a good game, but Fannin had a great game last week. He's a top 3 option for me at the position. This week, last week, if there was a week after that, there is a week after that. Week 18 is probably top 3 for me that week as well. All right, let's move back into the matchups, and let's talk about somebody that's probably going to be a little polarizing, there's only, I think, he's polarizing no matter how we talk about him. But Detroit wide receiver Jameson Williams, as we got the Minnesota Vikings hosting the Detroit Lions. Minnesota, 5.5-point dogs at home, 44.5-point total. Jameson Williams is ranked as the expert consensus wide receiver 12 in PPR scoring. I think that's a little too high given the matchup this week, right? Minnesota allows the 29th most PPR points to the position over their last 3 games. They've also allowed less than 200 yards passing in 6 of their last 7 games, right? Minnesota has allowed just 2 wide receivers to hit double-digit PPR points since week 10, right? And the last time we saw Minnesota and Detroit face off, right, Jameson Williams and Amon-Ra St. Brown both scored double-digit PPR points. That was the last time we saw 2 wide receivers score double-digit PPR points against Minnesota in the same game. If you remember early on in the year, Minnesota was struggling to cover opposing wide receivers. That has since changed, right? Like I said, if you look back to week 10, they've only allowed two wide receivers to hit double-digit PPR points since week 10. That was Zay Flowers, who got 12 points, and then that was CeeDee Lamb, who CeeDee Lamb scored, I think, like 18 PPR points. But despite the point, right, like you look at what they've done to these opposing passing offenses, right? Dak Prescott is the only quarterback in the last 7 games to throw for more than 200 passing yards. And obviously Dak leads the league in passing. It doesn't surprise me that he, was able to do that. However, look at the fantasy day that Dak had, right? Didn't throw a touchdown pass, was held under 12 fantasy points passing. Minnesota only allowed 33 passing yards last week to Jackson Dart. The game script here, even the fact that Detroit, they are 5.5-point favorites, and you would expect them to dominate this game because their defense is going up against, the second string quarterback here, Max Brosmer. You would think, all right, well, this should be an easy game for Detroit. And while it could be, right, it's only playing into the narrative of, high scoring, their defense gets a lot of short fields. There's not a lot of big plays in the passing game. They lean on a run heavy game plan. So again, Jameson Williams, not the best spot for him. I could totally understand somebody wanting to play him, but I'm just saying if I have options like a Jon Jennings or a T. Higgins or a Jacoby Myers or even a Stephon Diggs, those are all guys I would look at that are ranked behind Jameson Williams in expert consensus rankings this week. Those are all guys that I would look to play ahead of Jameson Williams, just given the matchup. And I get it. He's been hot. It'd be so hard to bench him, but I'm just looking at the facts here. So let's move on. We've got the Denver Broncos taking on the Kansas City Chiefs on Christmas Day. This is not what the NFL thought they were getting when they signed up Amazon Prime Video for this Thursday night game here between the Broncos and the Chiefs. But this game has a 36.5-point total, with the Broncos being 12.5-point road favorites here. And I'm going to lean in on our guy, Bo Nix, right? We haven't talked about him a whole lot this year after talking about him pretty much every week last year. But Bo Nix is the expert consensus quarterback 13 this week. He scored no less than 15.2 fantasy points over the last 3 games. Kansas City just allowed 18 fantasy points to Cam Ward last week, and he's a heavy favorite, albeit it's on the road, but still a heavy favorite nonetheless, going up against this Kansas City defense, which, like I said, allowed 18 fantasy points to Cam Ward last week. Now, I'll be completely honest, I did not watch that game. I probably saw 2 seconds of it. But given that Kansas City's eliminated from playoff contention, you have to ask yourself and wonder, like, this defense has been so good all year, allowed 18 fantasy points to Cam Ward. Is there something going on there? And what, is Bo Nix and Sean Payton just going to put them out of their misery this week, right? So championship week, I know that we're not hurting, we're not starving for options, but if you've got Bo Nix, you don't really have many other options, then yeah, I would totally be comfortable starting Bo Nix in this matchup here against Kansas City. All right. Moving on to the next game here, we've got the LA Chargers taking on the Houston Texans. This game is Saturday, 4:30 p.m. Chargers are 1.5-point home favorites, 39.5-point total. I'm going to lean in here on LA Chargers tight end Oronde Gadsden the second. He's the expert consensus tight end 19. Now, look, we've been all over the place with Gadsden, right? At first, it was like, hey, he's on his way to have like one of the best tight end seasons ever. Rookie tight end seasons ever. He's crushing it. He's a top 5 option rest of the season. To now, here we are, and he's basically been unplayable the last 4 weeks, right? Maybe even longer than that. So, why are we talking about him this week? Well, Houston allows the second most PPR points to the position over their last 3 games. They have allowed at least 14 PPR points in 2 of their last 3 games. So I think obviously, given the nature of the tight end position, some people lost Kittle. Gadsden is a desperation dart throw at the position if you really need one this week. This game, not all that interesting from a fantasy perspective. I'm not dying to play options in this game. Both these defenses have been pretty legit over the last several weeks. You can throw in the Chargers a little bit, although it seems like kind of matchup dependent. But CJ Stroud been so up and down, it's hard to even remotely trust him this week. So, Gadsden in a solid spot this week and worth a dart throw if you need one. Let's see. What else? Do we have any more questions? Oh, Ray Gamer 7046 says, thanks, fam. Have a good Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, everyone. Yes, you too, Ray. Appreciate you, brother. All right, let's move on. Let's talk Baltimore Ravens against the Green Bay Packers. We have doubts about both these quarterbacks in this game, whether they will be playing, but Green Bay Packers are 2.5-point home favorites. The line sits here at 40.5. Now, I don't know why. I mean, maybe it's the injury to Lamar, but Baltimore wide receiver Zay Flowers is the guy for me in this game. He's the expert consensus wide receiver 21. He scored double-digit PPR points in 8 of his last 9 games, and Green Bay has allowed the second most PPR points to opposing wide receivers over their last 3 games. And, the thing I thought was interesting was even with Lamar out last week, we saw Tyler Huntley come in, and Zay Flowers' production did not tail off a bit, right? So I think they clearly want to get him the ball. He's the guy that the passing offense has been working through the last several weeks, and again, a solid spot for him here. Now, this game as a whole, like, do you trust Josh Jacobs? I'm struggling to trust Josh Jacobs. I mean, I don't know what other options you have. Like I said earlier in the week, pick up Emmanuel Wilson. And just kind of hold on to him and see what happens as we get closer to kickoff. But I'd be looking for other options if at all possible for Josh Jacobs here. The matchup, not terrible. Baltimore allows the 14th most PPR points to opposing running backs over the last 3 games. But you've got, I guess it's not a short week because it was Saturday to Saturday. But Josh Jacobs, after what we saw last week, it'd be really tough to roll him out there confidently this week. The Packers wide receivers, I like the spot they're in, but Malik Willis, he's dealing with a shoulder. Jordan Love is dealing with a concussion. So if Love can get out of the concussion protocol, I actually like these options quite a bit between Watson and Reed and even Dobbs to an extent. It's just a matter of if Jordan Love is healthy. If Malik Willis is starting, I'd probably downgrade these options a little bit. But I would probably lean in on, I want to say Jaden Reed if I had to plant my flag somewhere with Malik Willis. If Jordan Love's in, I'll probably plant my flag on Christian Watson. That is it in this game. I mean, obviously Derrick Henry, you're going to play him despite the matchup. Nothing else really to look at there. All right, let's move on to the next game. We've got the Seattle Seahawks taking on the Carolina Panthers. The Panthers are at home in this one. The Seahawks are 7.5-point road favorites. The total sits here at 42.5. And I went back and forth on this one about which wide receiver I wanted to target, but I landed on Seattle wide receiver Rashid Shaheed. He's the expert consensus wide receiver of 48. Now, Carolina has allowed the 9th most PPR points to the position over their last 3 games. And Rashid Shaheed has at least 9.1 PPR points over his last 3 games. He has the return yardage benefit as well. So if you play in a return yardage league or league where you get points for the return yardage touchdown, he has an added boost there. Although I also still do like Cooper Kupp as an option as well. He's the expert consensus wide receiver 56. But both these guys are in a solid spot this week. On the Carolina side, I think you focus in on Tedoroy McMillan, Kenneth Walker. I don't think there's a reason to play Darnold or Bryce Young in this matchup. And then obviously JSN, you're going to play him every week. But that's it for me in this matchup here. Let's move on to the Arizona Cardinals against the Cincinnati Bengals. This game has some weather concerns, so not quite the game we would love it to be. Kind of wish it was in Arizona, but Arizona Cardinals are 7-point dogs on the road. This game has a 53.5 point total, and I'm going with Arizona running back Michael Carter. He's the expert consensus running back 24. He led the backfield with 13 opportunities, 50% running back rush share, and 17 routes in Week 16. And he's getting a Cincinnati defense that has allowed the 10th most PPR points to the position over their last 3 games here. So good spot here for Michael Carter. I also think that Amari DiMercato has, some intrigue as well, just given his role as the third down back, led the team in third down snaps last week upon his return to the lineup. But outside of that, I think, both these teams are in good spots here from a fantasy perspective. The weather obviously throws a little bit of a downer, but Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Chase Brown, I think they're all, within, maybe with the exception of T. Higgins, they're all ones at their position this week. T. Higgins right outside that wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 1 territory. When you look at the Arizona side, right, obviously Trey McBride, he leads the way there as a top 2 option at the tight end position this week. Jacoby Brissett, despite the down week last week, still think he's a QB1 this week. And then Michael Wilson, I think it's very real, right? The dip that we get from him when Marvin Harrison Jr. is in the lineup. So unfortunately, he's a wide receiver 2. Marvin Harrison, a wide receiver 2 as well, maybe closer to wide receiver 3. But it's quite unfortunate what happens there with Michael Wilson's fantasy production when Marvin Harrison is in. But I think you can continue to put him out there. Don't expect, obviously, the big production that we've seen from him in recent weeks. Moving on to the next game, we've got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers traveling in Miami to take on the Miami Dolphins. This game sits here as a 45.5 point total, with the Bucs here as 5.5 point favorites. I'm going with Tampa Bay quarterback Baker Mayfield. He's the expert consensus quarterback 11. You've got a must-win game here for Tampa Bay. Granted, they're on the road, but they're staying in state here, so not crazy travel plans there for them. But it's a must-win game for Tampa Bay. Miami has allowed the 17th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Miami has allowed at least 17 points to an opposing quarterback in 3 of their last 4 games here. So Baker Mayfield finds himself in a solid spot. That one game where they did not allow 17 plus fantasy points was to Brady Cook of the New York Jets. So, take that with a grain of salt. I like Baker Mayfield in this spot. His weapons are, in a halfway decent spot as well. So I can definitely lean in on Baker. Mike Evans, definitely continues to be the top option there amongst the Bucs pass catchers. Darren Waller, I'm not playing. Jalen Waddle had a solid day last week, but the matchup here is tough. Quinn Ewers, I'm not touching Quinn Ewers despite what the matchup says there. I would play Jalen Waddle. I'd play Jalen Waddle. I'd play him as a wide receiver 2. I'd play Waddle. But I think outside of Waddle and Achane, I don't think I could really play anybody else. I mean, it's a great spot here for Darren Waller, but he was banged up last week, banged up this week, dealing with the quarterback change. So despite the good matchup, I don't know if I can play him this week. All right, let's move on. We got the New England Patriots taking on the New York Jets. The New York Jets are hosting here as 12.5-point underdogs. The total sits here at 42.5. I'm going to go with New England wide receiver Stephon Diggs. It's a guy that I should have went with last week. I wanted to, but we saw a season high route participation last week. That was a season high since week 11 when he last played the Jets, coincidentally enough. And that led to 22.8 PPR points, which is his highest total since week 11 when he last played the Jets. So he's now getting a Jets defense that's allowed the 10th most PPR points to the wide receiver position over their last 3 games. I think you can definitely lean on him in this spot here. Drake May, I think he's a top 2 option. I think I have him as the QB1 this week. Ramondre Stevenson finds himself in a great spot. We're probably not going to get Travion Henderson. Breece Hall. The Jets have been struggling on offense, to say the least. New England allows the 4th most PPR points to the running back position over the last 3 games, but I honestly do not believe that the Jets will be able to take advantage of that with just how atrocious the offense has been. I'm not really looking to play anybody else from the Jets. No. All right, let's move on. Mac Hollins, I think, is also playable. I talked about him in the waiver show. I think he's a solid option, wide receiver 3 flex option there. If you're desperate, deeper leagues, Mac Hollins adds some value there. All right, let's move on to the next game. We've got the New Orleans Saints taking on the Tennessee Titans. The Saints here are 3-point favorites in a total that sits here at 38.5. I talked at the top about Taysom Hill a little bit. He's the expert consensus tight end 15, led the team in rushing last week, also pitched in 4 receptions and 36 yards on 6 targets. He should continue to see involvement in the offense. Tyler Shuck, I talk about Tyler Shuck every week. I was going to put him down again because he's ranked as a QB 12, so like a little bit better. But to me, he's a top 10 option at the position this week. So very clearly, Tyler Shuck, he's in play. Tennessee allows the 3rd most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks over their last 3 games. Juwan Johnson also finds himself in a great spot. Chris Olave, I think you just got to stay in the flames with that guy, regardless of what it looks like from a matchup perspective. You play him. Tony Pollard, I will continue to stick by the volume there for Pollard. You continue to play him, especially, again, that he's going to see that much work. They're only 3-point dogs, so they're at home. Should be enough. Should be a close enough game here that Pollard can get it done for you. Moving on, let's talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers versus the Cleveland Browns. The Browns here are 3.5-point home dogs. Total sits here at 33.5. Now, I'm going back to a well that does pretty good for us. Like you could even say it gains well. Pittsburgh running back Kenneth Gainwell. He's the expert consensus running back 20. Has seen a 20% target share the last 3 weeks. Cleveland allows the 2nd most PPR points to the position over their last 3 games. And then there's no DK Metcalf this week, which means there's some more volume, more targets to go around. So, obviously Jaylen Warren, I think you play him this week. Last week I said I'd play Kenneth Gainwell over Jaylen Warren. And obviously Jaylen Warren, he went off himself. Both had great games, so I don't even feel bad for the take. I think the process was correct. I just who would have thought that Jaylen Warren would rip off like 2 30, 40-yard runs against Detroit, who was one of the top rush defenses going into that game, or one of the top defenses against opposing running backs in fantasy perspective in that game. Now, coming in this game here, I would have said, regardless of what happened last week, I would have said Jaylen Warren, but I guess we'll never know. But Jaylen Warren walks into a good spot here, right? Like the Browns started off the year as a team you can't run on, and now you can absolutely run on them, right? Like we've seen them just get like dog walked by every team that's come in there and want to run the football on this Browns team. So I think the Steelers are going to try to do that this week. They're going to want to do that, and I think that Jaylen Warren is going to be a big beneficiary of that, as will Kenneth Gainwell. On the Browns side, it's really just Harold Fannin Jr. for me. Now Raheem Sanders, I think solid play if he's if he can go, or he can go, but if Dylan Sampson can't go, then like I said, Raheem Sanders finds himself in an even better spot here. But it's tough to really sell you on Raheem Sanders unless you're in a very deep league. You went like ultimate 0 RB and you lost, all your usable running backs. Like, that's the only way I could see you going Raheem Sanders this week. All right, let's move on. Let's talk the Jacksonville Jaguars against the Indianapolis Colts, and let's talk Jacksonville wide receiver Jacoby Myers. This game has a 48.5-point total. The Jags are 6.5-point favorites on the road here, and Myers has seen at least 6 targets in each game since week 11. He has no less than a 20% target share since week 11 as well. And week 11, just to put it in perspective, that was his second game since joining the Jags, right? He joined the Jags in week 10. Obviously, that game is going to be a little weird. It's his first game with the team. Since week 11, he's been on the field. He's been, running 90% of the snaps, has no less than a 20% target share in any game, has seen at least 6 targets in every game since then. And then you got this matchup against Indianapolis, an Indianapolis defense that allows the 6th most PPR points to opposing wide receivers over their last 3 games here. So definitely a solid spot for him as well. Parker Washington, I think, is also in play if you need help at the wide receiver position, as is Brian Thomas Jr. also in play this week, given the matchup here. And then Trevor Lawrence, I mean, you stay in the flames with Trevor Lawrence. I don't know how you can't right now at this point. Travis Etienne, I think, given the matchup this week, you can play him. Last week was a tough matchup, so I wasn't expecting a whole lot from Etienne that week. But I think this week you can lean on Etienne. On the Indianapolis side, this is like Josh Downs. I talked about him. I think he's been a big beneficiary of the move to Phillip Rivers, because a lot of those dump offs, the short yardage targets, short area of the field targets, those are going to Downs from Rivers. We saw Alec Pierce, kind of be activated again, which I thought was weird. I wouldn't bank on that happening again this week. I mean, Jacksonville allows the 7th most PPR points to the position over their last 3 games, but I would trust I would trust Downs with Rivers more than I would trust Pierce to do what he did for a second week in a row. I will tell you what, despite what he did last week, I think Pittman is in play, right, against Jacksonville. Just given his role, right? He's not he's like a hybrid between Downs and Pierce, right, where he can do a lot of the short area of the field stuff, but he can also do the deeper stuff down the field. So if I'm going to take my shot, if I'm taking my shot on Downs, and we're questioning taking a shot on Pierce, then we should 100% be taking a shot on Michael Pittman Jr., right? I mean, just given the matchup, given the game script of everything, Michael Pittman Jr. makes a ton of sense in this matchup here too. So I guess I should have just talked about Michael Pittman Jr. at that point. But anyway, let's talk the next game here. We'll talk about the New York Giants against the Las Vegas Raiders. The Raiders are 1.5-point home favorites. The game sits here at 41.5, and I'm taking Giants running back Tyrone Tracy. He's the expert consensus running back 22. He has exactly 18 touches in each of his last 2 games, and now is going up against a Las Vegas Raiders defense that's allowed the 12th most PPR points to the position over their last 3 games. Ashton Jeanty, someone asked me last week, I don't even remember who the other option was, very convenient on my part, right? Ashton Jeanty or another player. And I was like, another player. the other player for sure, because Ashton Jeanty has done nothing. Anyway, I would play Ashton Jeanty this week in this matchup against the Giants. Theo Johnson, I think, is a solid play this week as well, given, again, the nature of the tight end position. Brock Bowers is not going to be out playing this week, which is news to us. He's got a knee injury, so he's not going to play. So that's quite unfortunate. So it really is just Ashton Jeanty, Tyrone Tracy, Theo Johnson. I would play Wan'Dale Robinson. I know last week was tough, but I think last week was like literally, I think it was like one of the extremes. Like I would put my marbles back in the Wan'Dale Robinson bucket. All right, let's talk this next game here. We've got the Philadelphia Eagles taking on the Buffalo Bills. The Bills are 2.5-point favorites. Total sits here at 44.5. We've already talked about this game in some capacity, right? There's a little bit of weather concerns there. But I'm going to go with Devontae Smith. He's seen at least 8 targets in 4 of the last 5 games. He's the expert consensus PPR wide receiver 24. I do think there is a potential for some points in this game, a little back and forth nature to it. So, Devontae Smith definitely in a solid spot here to make some plays against the Buffalo Bills on Sunday. In terms of this game, I think Saquon's all the way back, so we're just going to plug him in, no hesitation. And obviously the quarterbacks you're going to play. Josh Allen is the expert consensus QB1. I didn't put him at 1. I almost wanted to put him at 3, and that was kind of being generous. But this Philadelphia defense, 31st most fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks over the last 3 games. So I'm not saying bench Josh Allen, but if you are out there and you're like, hey, I'm thinking about benching Josh Allen and you have some other options, right? Like, I wouldn't fault you for doing it. Would I do it? No, I don't think I'd have the gusto to do it. I think Drake May, I would bench Josh Allen for Drake May. There's another name I might bench Josh Allen for Drake May, but you got to stick around for that because that's my quarterback start of the week. But I think that's about the 2 names I would bench Josh Allen for. All right. Let's move on to the next game here. We've got the Chicago Bears taking on the San Francisco 49ers on Sunday Night Football. This one has some playoff ramifications, right? The Niners, I think they're playing for a wild card. The Bears are playing for the 1 seed, though. So this is going to be a good game. A lot of heavy juice to it. Chicago Bears are 3-point dogs here on the road. The total sits here at 51.5. We're going Chicago tight end Colston Loveland. He's the expert consensus tight end 11. He's got double-digit PPR points in 3 of his last 5 games. He's seen at least 4 targets in each of his last 5 games. He's got a San Francisco defense here allowing the 12th most PPR points to the position over their last 3 games. That's really the player that I want to play the most. I also I like Jon Jennings in this matchup as well. I like DeAndre Swift. Monungai, I don't think you can play Monungai reliably. Like, reliably, you can't play him, right? The process isn't there, right? It's not this is not a game where, unless you expect the Bears to like run away with this game, literally run away with it, then Monungai makes sense. But like I said, I like Jon Jennings. Brock Purdy, I'm not going to play Brock Purdy in this game. I'm not going to play Caleb Williams in this game. Actually, I would play Caleb Williams. I'd play Caleb Williams ahead of Brock Purdy just because of his rushing upside. Jake Tonges, if you don't have George Kittle, Jake Tonges has some upside, some intrigue. The Chicago defense, 23rd most PPR points to the position over their last 3 games, but you kind of just attaching yourself to Kyle Shanahan in that offense. DJ Moore is the Bears pass catcher outside of Colson Loveland that I would want to play. But the matchup here is not that great. And that's it in this game. And then we've got Monday Night Football, and we've got the LA Rams taking on the Atlanta Falcons. This game sits here at a 49.5 point total. The Rams are 8.5 point road favorites here. Game is in a dome, so we love that. And we're going with Atlanta quarterback Kirk Cousins. He's the expert consensus quarterback 20. Cousins has at least 17 fantasy points in his last two games. The LA Rams allow the fourth most fantasy points to the position. And then you've got Drake London, who's one more week removed from his injury here. So should provide a boost here for Kirk Cousins. Look, I never thought in a million years I'd be talking about Kirk Cousins in championship week, but I talked about him in the quarterfinals. I talked about him in the semifinals, and now we're talking about him in the finals. So, third time's a charm. So it's 18 fantasy points for Kirk Cousins this week. All right. So that's all I have for the matchup show. Let's talk about starts of the week, man. Week 17 starts of the week. It's the championship starts of the week. So last week was not a good week at all. Like, it was a terrible week. Jacoby Brissett, quarterback 25. Tony Pollard, running back 29. DK Metcalf, wide receiver 47. Our best finish was by Brenton Strange, though tight end 9. I will stand by. I thought Tony Pollard was a very solid play. It just did not crumble the way we thought. Brenton Strange came through kind of how we thought he would. DK Metcalf, that game was just so weird, with just like Jalen Warren's never-ending touchdowns and Kenneth Gainwell making plays like crazy. And yeah, it was just a weird game for DK Metcalf. And then Jacoby Brissett, I honestly have no idea what happened. But let's talk about this week. It's a brand new week, and let's talk the quarterback start of the week. And we'll talk Jacksonville quarterback Trevor Lawrence versus Indianapolis. Staying in the flames with him. It's been 6 straight QB1 finishes for Trevor Lawrence with back-to-back games of 30-plus fantasy points. Jacksonville's playing for the AFC South. And the outside looking in at the 1 seed. So, again, we need to stay in the flames here with Trevor Lawrence. I would start him over any quarterback that's not named Drake May. Like I said, I would consider playing him over Josh Allen this week. And he's got an Indianapolis defense allowing the 12th most fantasy points to the position over their last 3 games. Next up at the running back position, let's talk New England running back Ramondre Stevenson. He's the not expert consensus. He's going up against the New York Jets. Stevenson's in line for an increased workload this week, with Henderson possibly out with a concussion. And this would allow Stevenson to get the bulk of the work against the New York Jets defense, allowing the 5th most PPR points to the position over their last 3 games. At the wide receiver position, now this one's going to feel like cheating, but just stick with me, man. Atlanta wide receiver Drake London going up against the LA Rams kind of feels like cheating, like I said, but it's been a while since we've seen him. And it's in his first game back last week, he only managed 5.7 PPR points. So I'm talking to the Drake London manager that's out there, that's stressing, that made it to the finals and is like, what do I do? Well, let me break it down for you. He still saw 8 targets last week, and the playing time was a little down compared to his normal usage, but that's expected in his first game back from injury. And if you add a little bit more usage this week, combine that with the matchup against an LA Rams defense allowing the most PPR points to the wide receiver position over their last 3 games, this has all the makings of a shootout here for Drake London, this Atlanta offense versus this Rams offense. Now, let's go on to the tight end start of the week. And it's an oldie but a goodie, man. New Orleans tight end Juwan Johnson. He's fresh off a 16.9 PPR outing last week, and he enters week 17 here against the Tennessee Titans, having seen at least an 18% target share in 3 of his last 4 games. He has at least 9 targets in 2 of his last 4 games. And now he's got a matchup against the Tennessee Titans defense, allowing the 7th most PPR points to the position over their last 3 games. All right, y'all, that is it for the starts of the week. Again, Merry Christmas to you all who celebrate. happy holidays. Just again, appreciative of having this opportunity to sit here and talk about fantasy football, and to everyone who's sent the liked them. Listen to an episode, watch an episode, liked the tweet, liked an Instagram post, shared anything. Supporters of the Patreon. Just thank you so much. Really do appreciate all the love and support throughout the year, throughout the years as well. If you're a day one, but definitely appreciate that. And I hope you guys win your leagues. Hope you get to spend time with family, get to be surrounded by loved ones, and it's a really important thing to do, especially around this holiday season. Especially if you've got the pleasure of being off from work, taking some time off, but just make sure to spend that time with family and the loved ones. But that's going to wrap up the Week 17 matchup show. At this point, again, you've done the work, you've drafted well, you've worked the wire, you survived the injuries, and you've made it to the final week. Now it's about trusting your process and letting it play out. If today's breakdown helped you, make sure you share the video. You like the video, you subscribe, turn on those notifications so you don't miss another episode. And like I said, if you want access to the FFDX cheat sheet, you just got to join the Patreon, which is 100% free. Patreon.com/FFDX. If you want access to the rankings, the waiver wire article, and the Sunday Q&A, then just join the supporter tier for just $1 a month. No matter how it shakes out, again, I appreciate everybody who's been rocking with FFDX all season. Good luck in your championship matchups. Go get that trophy. I'll catch y'all on the other side. I'll get up on here, after the new year, after things, settle down a little bit, and just kind of catch everyone up on what's next and what what it's going to look like for the channel for the coming year and whatnot. But we'll handle all of that in the new year. But again, go get that trophy. I appreciate y'all, and I'll catch y'all on the other side. Peace.